I want to play you something pretty damn haunting. This is footage of Andrew Searle, and what we're going to talk about is what happened. It's a great murder mystery, and when I say great, horrible murder mystery, in the south of France. British couple who were living there, Andrew Searle, 65, and his 56-year-old wife, Dawn, were found dead after what looked like violent attacks at their home. We'll go into the details in a little while, but just before that, here's some haunting footage. This is the last film of Andrew Searle going to a local shop near the village where they lived, a place called Pesquy, north of Toulouse, in a very remote area to the east in the south of France. But here's Andrew Searle, the last time he was seen alive. So there he is. He's just at the counter. Hopefully he'll start moving in a little while. Oh, hang on. What happened to the footage? We've lost the footage. Can we get the footage, please? You know, basically, you see him going into a shop, and he pays for something, and then he disappears. It looks like it's been lost in our system, but we'll get that to you by the end of this segment because it's worth looking at. To discuss this, I mustn't call it an intriguing mystery because it is really, it's a very sad mystery. This happy couple somehow found dead at their home in a remote area of France. Let's discuss this with someone who knows France very well. She used to live there. She is a foreign affairs correspondent of the independent newspaper, Mary Dejevsky. Welcome to the show, Mary.
Thank you. Good evening.
Well, this is, as I say, I'm trying not to frame this as an intriguing murder mystery because two people have died in horrific circumstances. This was in the village of Pesquy, north of Toulouse, in a rather remote area to the east of the south of France. Last Thursday, Dawn, she's 56, was discovered in her pyjamas outside their house with a head injury, surrounded by her jewellery scattered around. Meanwhile, in the house, Andrew Searle, 65, a former investigator, he was found, apparently, what we're hearing is hanging, potentially with a gag in his mouth. Now, police are investigating a number of theories, one being that it could have been murder-suicide, the other being that because of his job, he used to investigate the criminal fraud, that perhaps it could be some kind of gangland revenge hit on him. But essentially, as I say, in the most horrible terms, this is one hell of a mystery, isn't it, Mary?
Well, it is, and I'm glad in a way that that you outlined all the terrible details, and I didn't have to, because it really is. I mean, it's both shocking and gruesome. It's a very remote area. It's sort of on the edge of the Massif Central. It's quite mountainous, and it's a long way from anywhere. Now, this also means that you've got basically the local police are initially responsible for investigating, and their response has been to say, well, you know, there's never been anything like this anywhere near here, and you can quite imagine that.
Indeed. Now, I believe that in France, information is hard to get hold of around this mystery, but it is cropping up in other countries. Italy, Italians are getting many more details than the French. What are you hearing from Italy?
Well, I was only hearing exact sort of details of the crime scene, which certainly reached Italy quite a lot earlier than they reached, say, readers and viewers in France, or certainly in the UK. I think that, I mean, the appalling thing is that there's these completely different theories. There is the theory of his past life as a crime investigator, which you can quite see might possibly bring those sort of consequences but it takes a lot to track somebody down there. Another thought, which looks, the sort of how they were found, does seem to support the idea of a burglary that went very, very badly wrong. But the more you think about that, the more you tend to think, well, that could be actually staged.
Yeah.
The way both of them were found, the business of the jewellery scattered, and I think the jewellery box, those sort of details almost look too much like a burglary that's been, as it were, staged and didn't happen with the sort of as you might expect something like that to happen.
I think it's reasonable for for us to speculate to some extent. You mustn't overdo it, because two people are lying dead in the most horrible circumstances.
Exactly. Yes.
But as you quite rightly say, people are saying, well, the fact that she was found outside, her head had been stoved in apparently, and she'd been bludgeoned and surrounded by her jewellery, and that he's inside hanging, apparently with a gag in his mouth. That doesn't mean that it could not have been a murder-suicide, if you see what I'm saying. That's what people...
No, absolutely, I agree. And of course, against that, you've got everybody, in a way, everybody's best instincts. Relatives don't even want to think about that. And the friends and neighbours, they apparently were quite sociable in the locality. And people are saying, well, they're very nice people. They seem to get on absolutely fine. Then there were certain questions that, you heard on their grapevine that were passed on, that maybe he had money worries. It's not, there's a lot of things going into this, none of which at the moment seems to be conclusive.
Yeah, that's my first thought, because I come across this quite a lot, and I'm not accusing the Searles of this, but we should bear in mind, by the way, they moved there, I think 7 or 8 years ago. They only got married 2 years ago. So, ostensibly everything should be happy. They've got a number of children by different marriages, earlier marriages, and Mr. Searle's father, Fred, seems like a loving father, retired British major. He's saying we have thousands of questions but no answers. But I've come across this quite often, and I'm not accusing the Searles of this, but we have all these TV shows in this country which are all about, new life in the sun, escape to the chateau. People watch this stuff on TV and they go, oh, yeah, and the jobs, or when these people go, oh, yeah, we moved to France, we bought this chateau, and now we're running a yoga centre. You think, well, is that really going to make you a living? So they buy these properties. They've seen it on the TV that you can make a nice living in the sunshine. And I think, and again, I'm not accusing the Searles of this, but people get down to these places. They find themselves living in the middle of nowhere. And in fact, the yoga centre, or whatever it was they planned, doesn't bring any money in at all. And they soon start to experience money difficulties. So it's definitely a possibility in these circumstances, I would suggest. I'm not hearing. Can I hear?
No, sorry. I thought maybe that was the last word on, because I don't have anything to add to that, really. I mean, that's it. It's entirely true that you can move out there and you can think that it's permanent, but there are all sorts of complications. And even if you speak the language and even if you're reasonably sociable, actually maintaining a house in that sort of in that sort of area, in that sort of position, that can add up.
Yeah. And I remember the reason I wanted to get you on about this story was I remember we got you on about the horrific rape saga that was in I think one of the remoter areas of Provence, and you were talking about these remote areas of France where I think people from Britain don't quite understand, you know, how different they can be to what we would expect of modern life. And I remember you saying to me, it's always haunted me ever since, that strange things happen in these places. So yes. Would this be the kind of area that we could be talking about?
Oh yeah, I mean it's a long way. You know, even when you look at a map and you say, well, it's to the northeast of Toulouse. Well, it is to the northeast of Toulouse, but it'll actually be quite difficult to get there. Local buses in France have improved, but it's not wonderful. So basically, you're reliant on a car. The roads are not wonderful either, and you know, to get anywhere, you may have a couple of local shops. You may have nothing. But it can be very wild, and that adds to not just to the sort of sense of possible isolation, but it actually adds to the expense of being there, because you have your house, but it needs maintenance, and you can get very extreme weather, which I was always for the time that we had a house in France, which we had in a town, because I was absolutely adamant that I didn't want to be in the middle of nowhere, deserted place. But you know, if the phone rang at sort of 7 o'clock in the morning UK time, and it was our French neighbour, I was always absolutely terrified that, you know, something had flooded, a tree had fallen on the roof. There were all sorts of possible things that had happened. There was nothing ever quite that catastrophic, but you know, there was always the possibility there.
I mean, you know, I've been to France quite a few times, well, lots, and I've always found the French to be, you know, contrary to, you know, that old cliche that the French hate the Brits and the Brits hate the French. I mean, I always think that nationally that may be the case, but on a personal level, I think both nationalities tend to get on quite well. But in these rural areas, are they hostile to interlopers, to foreigners?
I think it depends very much. I mean, it depends partly on your attitude, and it seems to me that the Searles were absolutely fine. That they socialised a lot with the people around them. I think. I don't know what the position was with language, but that can be a difficulty, and. I think the French maybe tend to be a little bit more private than the British do, especially among country dwellers. It's almost, you might think it's perverse, but where there are fewer people, maybe there's actually less socialising than there would be, say in the UK, and villages are further apart. So I think that there is on the one hand, a greater sense of isolation, but also a degree of protecting privacy. But also, you know, I think what we were talking about last time was the extent to which there are secrets, and there are secrets that are kept inside remote communities. And, you know, there may be a sort of hidden life of a place where you are that you simply don't penetrate, but everybody else around you knows.
Interesting. Last question, really, Mary. Good to talk to you again. What's the murder rate like in France? I mean, what the violence in that country? I mean, we have a real violence problem here, quite a high murder rate.
Oh, goodness. I mean, exactly. I don't know. One thing that I do know is that there were killings, including suicides, more often than you expect, because there's actually quite widespread gun ownership, especially in the countryside. And so, because there are such large parts of France that are rural, then and there are people who have guns for for hunting purposes or self-defense, and so there is that sort of gun crime. There's also something which was really noticeable compared with the UK, that when figures were given for or details were given for suicides, that there was a relatively high suicide rate among police, among the gendarmes.
Oh, wow. Really, that's interesting.
And one of the sort of explanations given, aside from the obvious complexities of the job, was that they actually had access to firearms in a way that people in this country, including the police, generally wouldn't.
That's interesting. Well, listen, all we can hope is that that this mystery is solved for the sake of the children and Mr. Searle's dad, and of course our thoughts and sympathies are with the family. Mary, thank you so much for talking to me. Good to talk to you again. Mary Dejevsky. Start that again, Kevin. Oh, God. Mary Dejevsky. It's not that difficult, is it? Foreign Affairs correspondent at The Independent.